What's clear in the first reading and in the gospel is that as people we have an obligation to admonish, to correct, and to discipline. Parents know that. Parents know that they have the authority over their children, and that part of their responsibility in parenting is to admonish, to correct, and to discipline. Because while we accept 2-year-old behavior from a 2-year-old, we do not accept 2-year-old behavior from 20-year-olds. It's just not reasonable. And so some things we tolerate for a little while, and we try to correct these things that are unwanted and undesirable through admonishing, through correcting, and through disciplining. Now, in a perfect world, everything is said and everything is done in and with and through love. And so if it's said, done through love, then in the perfect world it is received in the same way. But obviously Jesus knows that we're not living in a perfect world. And so sometimes the things that I say and the things that I do come out sideways because of my wounded human nature. My wounded human nature. I may not intend to say those things that wound, but intentional or unintentional, they still hurt. Or I can even be gentle. And I can try to be as loving as I possibly can. But the person who I'm speaking to is filtering everything that I'm saying through their wounded human nature. And so oftentimes, what is said is not what is heard. And the result of all of that, broken human relationships. Broken human relationships. And we have all of us have them. You don't have to go too far to see the result and the fruit of people who don't get along. I mean, for goodness sakes, we're living it. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. And so we have an obligation to repair broken relationships. It's not just a suggestion. It's not just a good idea. It's a command from the Lord. And He gives us this morning the blueprint on how to go about repairing broken relationships. The first thing He tells us to do is if your brother sins against you, go and tell him alone. Did you notice whose responsibility, on whose shoulders it lies to initiate the reparation and reconciliation? On the person who has been offended. Not the offender, the person who's been offended. If your brother sins against you, go and tell your brother alone. But you know what happens most of the time, or lots of times? Instead of going to that person, we go to everybody else. We tell this one, and 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 you know what that's called? Gossip. But better yet, you know what it really is? It's character assassination is what it is. And it destroys the relationship even further. It makes things worse. It makes things worse. So the scripture says that the offended person needs to go to the person that they have an issue with and to discuss it with them by themselves. That's the first step. If they listen, then you've won the person over. Now, you and I both know that that's not always the case, and it doesn't always happen that way. Because you know what? we all have stuff. We all have stuff. You know, one of the things that I experience in my office oftentimes is when I have couples come in, they both want the same thing, they're both saying the same thing, neither one of them can hear the other. You know why? Too much stuff. Too much stuff. And so the next step is, if that doesn't work, Jesus says, he uses an example from the Old Testament, from the law. Nothing could be corroborated unless it was corroborated on the fact of witnesses. So he says, go get one or two people. Go get someone who's impartial so they can be a listener. They can be objective. So that that person could say, did you hear what this one said? Did you hear what this one said? Sometimes it takes an impartial person to hear what both people are saying and to say, you know what? I'm hearing you both say the same thing. That's what happens in my office. I'm hearing you both say the same thing. You both want the same thing, but you have to hear him and you have to hear her. You have to develop good listening skills. And if that doesn't work, Jesus says, tell the church. It doesn't mean go tell more people so you can get more people on your side. He says, bring it to the church. In other words, bring it to the family so they can pray. Bring it to the family so they can pray. Because Jesus said, where two or more are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them. And whatever they ask for in my name, the Father will grant it. What do we say? You know what that saying is? To err is human, to forgive is, there's truth, that's an eternal truth. It's not just a saying. Forgiveness is not possible for you and I without grace. We are too wounded. We are too wounded. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not possible without grace. And the proof is what we're living out there. See, we've kicked God out of everything. How's that working for us? How are we doing with that? So sometimes going to the church, going to the family means you have to have an intervention. Everybody's got to sit down. They got to talk about it. This is how your behavior's affecting me. This is how your behavior's affecting me. This is how your behavior's affecting me. So you call out the behavior, not the person. Not the person. You know, there's something in this gospel this morning that I don't think any of us heard. Jesus says that whatever I bind on earth is going to be bound in heaven. If I have an obligation to repair and reconcile broken relationships in my life, see, and I say no, and I'm bound to that here, that's bound in heaven. That's bound in heaven. How many of us here in this church this morning want to be responsible to stand before God himself and have to answer for failing to try to repair and reconcile broken relationships? Raise your hand if you feel you want to stand before the Lord and have to account for that. I don't see one hand up. You know, I have the best vantage point in this church, and I'm looking at a lot of you people, and a lot of you people right now, you're looking at me like deer in headlights. Do you know why? You know why? Because the truth is, we all have broken relationships. People have said things, people have done things, and we have been wounded by the things that were said and by the things that were done. And so we have an obligation here to try to repair and reconcile the broken relationship. And if I fail to do it here, I cannot be expected to stand before God himself and say, will you please forgive me because of my broken relationship with you through sin? It doesn't work that way. You know, recently I had somebody come to my office. They had a broken relationship with somebody in their family. And I'm sure that you, like I, have been in a family gathering. You've been at some sort of a gathering, and you know that there's two people there who they don't like one another, they don't get along. Everybody is on pins and needles. Isn't that right? You're just like waiting because you're expecting something to blow up, and it's going to ruin everything, and so you're walking around. You don't want to make any waves. You want to see. I see you're all nodding. A lot of people, you're nodding your head because you know that's what happens. And it happens a lot. So this person came to see me because they were at their wit's end. So they came looking for some advice. So I said, did you try this? Yes. Did you try this? Yes. Did you try this? Yes. So guess what? I pulled out my Bible and I read this gospel to them. And I began to explain the steps because this person was the offended party. So they said. They were the offended party. So I said, here's my advice to you. First of all, you have the obligation, because you're the offended party, to go. But I said, don't go pointing fingers. That's not going to work. You point fingers at people, you're calling them out. You know that. You know it. So you don't point fingers at people. My advice to you is to go to this person and say, Mary, I'm just using Mary's name. Mary, will you please forgive me for anything that I ever said or ever did that hurt you? And they looked at me and said, I'm not doing that. I said, okay, you don't have to. But you came here to me looking for advice. So how's what you're doing working for you? It's not working at all, Father. Okay. So my advice is, go to the person and say, will you please forgive me for anything I ever said or ever did that hurt you? Okay. You know human nature. Come on. We're all alike. All of us are alike. So sheepishly, the person left my office, and I said, by the way, let me know what happens. So about a week later, this person came back, and they said, Father, I want to tell you about my meeting with Mary. Oh, what happened? Well, I went to see Mary, and I said, Mary, will you please forgive me for anything that I ever said or did that hurt you? And Mary looked at this person and said, you mean you don't hate me? And they said, I don't hate anybody. And so Mary said, I forgive you, but in forgiving you, I have to ask you to forgive me for this and this and this and this and this and this. Will you forgive me? I forgive you from the bottom of my heart. What happened after that? We embraced and we started to cry. You see the fruit? You see the fruit of being willing, okay, to let go of ego and wanting to be right, and point out all of the reasons why you are right and why you are offended, and to recognize that just maybe you have some ownership with some stuff. It's not always simple. It's not simple. It's very convoluted. Why is it convoluted? Because people are complex. Remember I said to you, we have wounded human natures. We filter everything through our human nature. You may be saying one thing to me, but because of my wounded experiences, I may be hearing something else. Or I may want to say something to you that's loving and gentle, you see, but because of my own wounded relationships and my wounded experiences, it comes out angry, short-tempered. You see, the second reading, Paul says, owe nothing to anyone except in love. There is always, always, always a debt of love. You're never going to pay that off. You're never going to pay that off. So here's the deal. I said to the other people, other masses, I'm going to offer you a challenge, but it's not me. I'm not offering you a challenge. The gospel is challenging every single one of us here this morning to repair and reconcile broken relationships. Why? Because that's what God is going to hold us to. I'm not saying it. Jesus said it. And so my obligation is to try to repair and reconcile broken relationships. I can only do what I can do. Some people may say, look, I don't care. I still don't want anything to do with you. You've done what you could. You've done what you could. Now it's on them. Forgiveness takes one person. Reconciliation takes two people. The fruits of reconciliation are amazing. I wonder where these two people would be today had this person not gone to Mary and said, will you please forgive me? You can say you're sorry until the cows come home, but saying you're sorry is not the same as saying, will you please forgive me? You see, it's so quiet in this church right now, you could hear a pin drop. None of us wants to be held responsible and accountable by God himself because we failed to repair a relationship. And now it stands in the way of repairing this relationship. The challenge is hard, but oh my gosh, is it worth it?